It was about the optics, wasn't it? The words, delivered with a practiced, honeyed lilt, sliced through the afternoon quiet of the conference room. My reflection in the polished mahogany table stared back, a pale, drawn ghost. Outside, the city hummed, blissfully unaware of the quiet implosion occurring within these soundproofed walls. I'd known, of course. I'd always known. The air in our family gatherings, thick with unspoken resentments and forced smiles, had been a constant, low-grade fever I'd learned to live with. My sister, Eleanor, had always been a master of presentation, her life a carefully curated gallery of achievements and possessions, each item strategically placed to elicit admiration. My own existence, by contrast, felt like a forgotten utility closet, functional but unremarkable. My childhood was a tapestry woven with threads of Eleanor's effortless superiority and my own quiet acquiescence. Summers at the lake house weren't about building sandcastles, they were about Eleanor's perfectly manicured tan and the way our parents fumbled over themselves to praise her every childish pronouncement. I remember once, at 10, I'd spent days painstakingly crafting a driftwood sculpture of a soaring eagle. I presented it with trembling pride. Eleanor, already adept at charm, had clapped her hands. "Oh, it's interesting, darling. But look at shells. I've arranged them into a perfect dolphin. Mother, isn't it magnificent?" My eagle, a clumsy, earnest thing, was promptly forgotten, relegated to a dusty corner of the sunroom. It was a small incident, easily dismissed, but it was a blueprint. Eleanor's successes were always highlighted, amplified. Mine were often overlooked, or subtly diminished. This pattern extended into our adult lives, her career trajectory a gleaming rocket ship, mine a steady, grounded transport. When it came to our parents' estate, the whispers began almost immediately, fueled by Eleanor's insinuations about my impracticality and her own financial acumen. The true turning point, the moment the familiar ache solidified into a bitter certainty, arrived during the final audit of the family business. Our father, a man of unwavering integrity, had passed away unexpectedly, leaving a void and a complicated legacy. Eleanor, having strategically positioned herself as the heir apparent, took immediate charge. She declared a need for external scrutiny, a thorough review to ensure everything was in impeccable order. I trusted her. I wanted to believe this was a genuine act of stewardship. But even then, a tiny seed of doubt was planted when I overheard her on the phone, her voice a stage whisper, "Make sure the numbers look clean. We don't want any surprises for the beneficiaries, do we?" The audit was led by a respected firm, headed by a Mr. Davies, a man whose reputation preceded him. Eleanor handled all the preliminary meetings, citing my emotional distress as a reason for my exclusion. I went along with it, the quiet fatigue of grief and familial obligation overriding my nascent suspicions. The report, when it finally landed on my desk, was a dense, jargon-filled document. I skimmed it, looking for anything obvious, anything that screamed impropriety. It was all perfectly legal, impeccably presented. Eleanor had, as always, ensured the optics were flawless. The day the audit report was finalized, the air in the executive dining room was heavy with an enforced formality. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the otherwise still air. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her posture regal, her smile serene. Mr. Davies, across from her, looked pleased, a man who had successfully navigated a complex task. I sat to her left, my stomach a tight knot. Eleanor gestured to me with a delicate hand. "Darling, Mr. Davies has assured me everything is in order. The audit is complete. He's just going to walk us through the key findings." She looked at Mr. Davies, her gaze conveying a silent instruction. He cleared his throat, unrolling a large chart. He spoke of operational efficiencies, of minor adjustments to account for market fluctuations, of robust internal controls. It was all vague, reassuring, and utterly devoid of any hint of malfeasance. Then, he paused. There was, however, he continued, his tone shifting slightly, one area that required a bit more clarification. A series of unusually large, undocumented vendor payments made in the final quarter before Mr. Sterling's passing. The documentation was, shall we say, incomplete. My breath hitched. Eleanor's smile flickered, almost imperceptibly. She leaned forward. Undocumented? Mr. Davies, are you quite certain? We have meticulous records. Her voice was a silken threat. Mr. Davies met her gaze, his own unwavering. I am certain, Ms. Sterling. The payments total nearly $2 million, directed to an offshore entity with no discernible business purpose related to our OP. Rations. He pointed to a section of the report. My team contacted the relevant authorities in the Cayman Islands. The entity in question, Sterling Solutions Limited, is registered to a nominee director. Further investigation revealed it is, in fact, a shell corporation. A shell corporation that shares a significant portion of its beneficial ownership with, well, with you, Ms. Sterling. The silence that followed was profound, a deafening roar in my ears. The sunlight seemed to dim. Eleanor's face, previously a mask of calm authority, contorted into a primal flash of panic, quickly suppressed. She turned to me, her eyes wide with a calculated plea. He's mistaken, of course. A simple misunderstanding. I'll have my lawyers look into this. But I saw it then. The smug entitlement, the dismissive arrogance, the absolute certainty that she could manipulate everything, everyone. The polished veneer had cracked, revealing the rot beneath. She hadn't just been negligent, she had actively concealed it, hoping it would be buried under layers of corporate jargon and my own grief. The next few days were a blur of silent, cold fury. I didn't confront Eleanor, didn't rage or threaten. I simply retreated. I spent hours poring over the audit report, cross-referencing every single line item with bank statements and internal memos I had access to. I confirmed the vendor payments, the offshore entity, the nominee director. I then quietly contacted a discreet forensic accountant, a man known for his meticulousness and absolute discretion, someone who owed me a considerable favor from a previous, less fraught business venture. I laid out the facts, the report, the dates, the amounts. I didn't ask for an accusation, I asked for confirmation of her method, her likely intent, and a clear, irrefutable trail of her actions. He worked for 72 hours straight. The document he delivered was small, crisp, and devastating. It detailed the timing of the transfers, the bank accounts they originated from, and crucially, the originating IP addresses of the transfer authorizations, all traced back to Eleanor's personal devices, logged in during hours she was supposedly unavailable due to personal matters. It also identified the intermediary bank used, a small, unregulated institution that specialized in high-speed, low-trace transactions. The final piece was a discreetly obtained, encrypted email chain between Eleanor and a contact at this intermediary bank, discussing the establishment of Sterling Solutions Limited and its purpose, to facilitate discrete personal investments and asset management, outside of standard regulatory scrutiny. The email was dated 2 months before our father's death. This wasn't negligence, it was premeditated embezzlement, a calculated betrayal of our father's trust and the family's legacy. The next morning, I walked into the main office, a single manila folder in my hand. Eleanor was in her father's old office, on a call, her voice booming with authority. I waited until she hung up, then walked in. She looked up, surprised to see me. Darling, what a surprise. I placed the folder on her desk, pushing it gently towards her. This is a supplementary report, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. From an independent investigator. She picked it up, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. She opened it, her eyes scanning the first page. The color drained from her face. She flipped through the subsequent pages, her breathing shallow. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading, but I offered nothing. No comfort, no leniency. I simply watched as the carefully constructed edifice of her life began to crumble around her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at the report, then at me, her face a mask of utter defeat. I turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the silence with the irrefutable evidence of her undoing. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic symphony of Eleanor's desperation. Texts flooded my phone, frantic pleas interspersed with veiled threats and increasingly desperate attempts to spin the narrative. "You don't understand," one read. "It was a temporary measure to protect the assets." Another, "This will ruin us. Think of the family name." My flying monkeys, a predictable gaggle of distant relatives and their sycophantic friends, began to appear, their voices echoing Eleanor's manufactured distress. They called, they emailed, they even showed up at my door, their faces etched with a performative concern, asking if I was sure about this, if I'd really considered the consequences. I responded to none of them. The forensic accountant's report, along with copies of the original audit findings and my own supplementary evidence, had already been discreetly delivered to the board of directors and the company's legal counsel. The swiftness of their response was almost gratifying. Eleanor was suspended with immediate FCT, her access to company funds and systems revoked. The ensuing investigation was brutal and public, as these things tend to be. Whispers turned into headlines, then into front-page news. Her carefully curated image, the pillar of financial rectitude, imploded. The offshore entity was a clear violation, the misappropriation of funds undeniable. Her attempts to deny, to shift blame, were met with icy legal pronouncements and the cold, hard facts. The social fallout was immense. Friends evaporated, invitations ceased, and the hushed tones that followed her everywhere were no longer admiring but accusatory. She was left isolated, her empire of appearances dismantled brick by brick. I never saw her again. The quiet satisfaction wasn't in her downfall, but in the absolute certainty that the truth, however long it took, always finds its way out. There was no joy, no triumph, just a deep, abiding calm. The fever had finally broken.